You have probably noticed famous cameos in Star Wars and hunted for Easter eggs tucked into scenes for eagle-eyed fans to find. Well, in today's episode of The Rambling Star Wars Fan, I'm going to talk about at least 8 nostalgic nuggets that can be found in Season 1 of Star Wars Skeleton Crew. It's okay if you don't know what nostalgic nuggets are. I'll be sure to describe them to you in a little bit. And if you haven't done it yet, please be sure to like and subscribe to the show. I'm still on a mission to get 1,977 subscribers, and I could really use your help towards that goal. Okay, pour yourself a Kifu fruit fizz and reach for some chopper cheese toast, because this episode of The Rambling Star Wars Fan is about to take off.
Gather round, ye scallywags, and lend an ear to Ken. He's the rambling Star Wars fan, and he's back again. Stories from a galaxy far, far and wide. Grab your saber, mateys, come along for the ride. Ken's got tales of Jedi fights and Sith that creep at night. Droids and starships, hyperspace, the Force is always bright. Sit you down and subscribe now, join our merry band. The Rambling Star Wars Fan, let's sail across the sand. Yo-ho, it's Ken with the tales we love. From Tatooine to Endor, stars shine bright above. Raise a mug of blue milk, sing a rebel song. The Rambling Star Wars Fan, where we all belong.
Hello, and welcome back to The Rambling Star Wars Fan. I'm Ken, the host of this wacky contribution to the galaxy of Star Wars fandom. Skeleton Crew, the most recent live-action series on Disney Plus, launched on television screens and in select theaters around the United States late last year. I was lucky enough to get a seat in one of those theaters, along with Mike from the Inflatable Falcon and Safi, his daughter/co-host of Carita Cast. And we got whisked across the galaxy with a gaggle of Star Wars middle schoolers as they began an adventure filled with pirates, spaceship, heaps of new creatures, a cranky droid, and a faux Jedi. If nothing else is said about that show, I think it was super fun to watch. The music was great. The makers combined modern-day special effects with classic stop-motion puppets and made some amazing costumes, props, sets, and so on. I also think that all the actors were top-notch, from the youngsters who portrayed the newest members of the Star Wars family, all the way up to the well-known actor Jude Law. And if you haven't watched it yet, I think you should. If you have watched it, I think you should watch it a few more times, because there are lots of great things tucked into that show. Since the very beginning, the makers of Star Wars have made their offerings to us very, very interesting in many ways and on many levels. They have fascinated us with the stories, wowed us with the special effects, blew our minds with the music, and beyond the props and the sets and the actors and the dialogue and all of those other things, I think there are 3 other things that I've noticed on the scenes, or in the scenes rather. They are cameos, Easter eggs, and nostalgic nuggets. I think it's just one of the many reasons I watched those movies over and over and over and over again. There's a chance that I'm going to see something that I haven't seen before, or hear something that I didn't notice before, or make a connection to something in a way I've never thought of before. You see, cameos are brief appearances by unexpected performers. You can think of them like seeing Stan Lee in many of the Marvel movies, or Daniel Craig showing up in The Force Awakens. Easter eggs are little references to other things that are put on the screen by the makers for all of us to find, hence the name Easter eggs. Some of them can be visual, some of them can be a line of dialogue or even a sound. I mean, for instance, the numbers 1138 were seen on a battle droid in The Phantom Menace. That number refers to George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138. The phrase, "I've got a bad feeling about this," has shown up many times and is hard to miss. And not only do we have that quote to look for or listen for, there's no other joy that can come, no greater joy that can come from a well-placed Wilhelm scream. Throughout the years, there have been bunches and bunches and bunches of Easter eggs and cameos to discover. Heck, they even managed to put actual potatoes in the asteroid field of The Empire Strikes Back, a kitchen sink in Attack of the Clones, and several props tucked into a scene with John Williams that paid homage to his many awards nominations throughout the years. And for me, one of the fun things about the latest live-action shows have been the bits and pieces that got me thinking about other things. I feel like they're my personal connections from the Star Wars galaxy to many, many other things. For instance, Skeleton Crew is filled with pirates from the very first scene, and we know, that the makers wanted us to think back to movies like Goonies. They didn't realize that it also got me thinking about Hook, Muppet Treasure Island, Treasure Planet, Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and a whole bunch of other movies. I mean, Rob from Bantha Milk Podcast and I've started calling these bits and pieces nostalgic nuggets. And Nick, his other co-host, called them Nos Nugs, and I'm pretty sure that term is going to stick. Nos Nugs are more personal than Easter eggs or cameos, and for me, there's something on the screen, whether it's a thing or a sound, that get us happy and excited and think of other things beyond just what we're watching. And for this show, I'm going to talk about 8 nostalgic nuggets, one for every episode in season 1 of Skeleton Crew. And I might even throw in a bonus one near the end of the show just for the fun of it. And I'm hoping by now that you've watched the Skeleton Crew. If not, pause, go watch the series, come on back and enjoy the show. And I think it's fair to say that now is as good a time as any to give you my spoiler warning. This show may contain spoilers for some of the novels, the comics, the cartoons, the video games, the magazine articles, the internet posts, the live action shows, the movies, and the appearances on various variety shows. I tend to ramble on and on and on about Star Wars stuff, and I'm not sure what you have or haven't seen. And so I want to apologize ahead of time if I spoil anything for you. From here on out, you proceed at your own risk. You've been warned.
I found something buried in the woods. Dad.
This is unacceptable. Do you understand?
What do you think it is? Don't touch anything. What did you do? We're lost. Really lost.
I need you to take the controls.
Okay. Neil? Neil?
A crew of murderous pirates is coming.
Something's wrong.
They're not going to just turn up. We need to find them.
So let's get back to the nostalgic nuggets from Skeleton Crew. The first episode was called This Could Be a Real Adventure. In the first episode of the series, we got to see Wim playing with action figures in his room. And in another scene, just a little bit later, we saw him and his bestest buddy Neil play acting of having a pretend lightsaber battle before they got on the bus. And if you didn't notice, Neil happens to look a lot like a character from Captain EO, but that's for another episode. And I think that many kids and lots of adults can relate to acting out scenes with their Star Wars toys, swinging around a pretend laser sword, and getting together with their friends to play make-believe. In another way, those 2 brief scenes reconnect us to other scenes in Star Wars where we saw kids playing with toys. I mean, some of you might remember Broom Boy and his stablemates from The Last Jedi. You might remember Jyn Erso's Stormy action figure from Rogue One, or Wrecker's Tuca stuffy named Lula from The Bad Batch. And then who could forget about Lumpy's Bantha toy that was decapitated by a stormtrooper in the Star Wars Holiday Special. Don't forget that 19-year-old Luke was also spotted playing with a T-16 Skyhopper in Uncle Owen's garage while C-3PO was in the back taking an oil bath. See, in my mind, Star Wars toys are a great example of nostalgic nuggets because many of us know the important piece that action figures and toys played in funding many of the early Star Wars movies. In fact, I think it was one of George Lucas's greatest decisions was to retain the merchandising rights to Star Wars. I mean, at first, he wanted to be able to sell some posters, some T-shirts, and some puzzles, and he also wanted to create these action figures, things that the kids could play with in their living room or in the backyard to keep the stories of the movies alive. And many toy companies, when George went to them with this idea for creating action figures, turned him down. And it wasn't until Bernie Loomis, the president of Kenner in 1977 that agreed to make those 3 3/4 action figures. And so between 1977 and 1983, it's been said that about 700 million action figures were made. It's a lot of plastic. In fact, people are still collecting those funky figures today. In fact, some of them have been selling for tens of thousands of dollars, and they're still churning out the toys today. And as you can see around me, I mean, I have my own action figures to be thankful for. And yes, I still play with them. I've been known to pack some in luggage when we go on vacation, or bring a few of them out with us when we go on random adventures. Mostly because I never know when the moment's going to show up, when I have an opportunity to take a fun photograph with these guys and gals. So the moment could be in an airport or at a local ice cream stand, or even underneath or near Epcot's giant golf ball. Episode 2, way, way out past the barrier. In this episode, the 4 main kids and their recently reanimated robot friend, SM-33, found themselves in a pirate ship. They found themselves in a pirate port carved into an asteroid. After their ship was tethered and they were met by a ferryman, in this case, a shuttleman, but I'm not here to judge. That ferryman, that shuttleman, was the same species as a character from the 1985 made-for-TV Star Wars movie, The Battle for Endor. That little guy was the same species as a super speedy teak. And I can remember back then sitting down on my living room floor. I was about 10 years old or so, and I watched that show with such joy. And I recently got to watch it on Disney Plus, and it both amazes me and frightens me that movie is 40 years old this year. I mean, it was on TV during a time when we didn't know we'd get another Star Wars movie, and now we can watch it on devices that fit into our pocket. And of all of the aliens, characters, creatures, figures that Christopher Ford and John Watts could have put on the screen as a ferryman, the fact that they chose that one was not lost on me. I saw what they did there, and seeing him made me smile a very big smile. And my hope is that Nos Nug from Ewok Adventures made some other fans smile too. Episode 3. Very, very interesting as an astrogation problem. Wim, Neil, Fern, and KB wanted to go home. Jod, the kind of sketchy half faux Jedi, half pirate character, was also very interested in getting to Aten, the home planet of the kids, because he knew that place, that planet, was the basis of a pirate legend. It was known for its fabled treasure, and Jod, J-O-D, Jod, wanted to get his hands on some of those golden credits. Jod brought SM-33 and that quartet of kids to talk to one of his friends named Kim, who happened to live on a moon base in an awesome cross, and she was an awesome cross between a cat and an owl. Kim, voiced by, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Aaliyah Shawkat, who also happened to play Bella in Pee-wee's Big Holiday movie that showed up on Netflix, also played a couple characters in Adventure Time. She's in this particular show, Kim, she's an old astronomer who also knows a great deal about galactic history, including remembering a little bit about Aten and the other jewels of the High Republic. And at the moment in the show, she seemed like she was going to be a character to help the kids get back to their home. Well, Kim, the Nos Nugget for this show, reminds me of Aughra, Keeper of Secrets from the Dark Crystal. She had this impressively large planetary model in her house or in her home, and she used that, Aughra did, to help Jen and Kira, that movie's characters, figure out where they needed to go. And as weird as the Dark Crystal was and is, I can't even begin to count the number of times that I watched it. And Kim was the Nos Nug that got me thinking about that 1982 creation by Jim Henson, Frank Oz, and Gary Kurtz, where the puppetry reigns supreme. And it also got me thinking, to the other things that we've seen so far up until this point in Skeleton Crew are all the wacky, wild puppets. So Kim, thanks for being that Nos Nug that got me thinking about that stuff. Episode 4. Can't say I remember no Aten. This episode's Nos Nug comes in the form of a quote from one of our main characters. Wim, the show's dreamer, met another kid on Akron which was one of the other lost planets, just like at Aten. And his first question, or at least one of his first questions to this other child from this newly discovered planet is, are you in an army of kids battling adults for control over the planet? And Fern yanked Wim away before he could get an answer, but it wasn't quick enough to get my mind to wander to other stories and movies and books that have that idea of kids being responsible for themselves. I mean, there's Peter Pan, a story about a tribe of lost boys who fought against a group of pirates led by Captain Hook and his trusty first mate, Smee, who, when you think about it, Smee, S-M-E-E, is very similar to SM-33, the droid from this show. Then there's Lord of the Flies, this book that was published in 1954, which is a book of a group of British boys stranded on an uninhabited island. Not to mention, it also got me thinking about Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and all the kids living on planet Earth that were waiting for Captain Walker to fly in and take them off to Never Never Land. And thinking about those survivors of a nuclear holocaust got my rambling mind thinking about Cassian Andor's sister and all the other children that he left behind on the planet of Canary. SM-33 may not be able to remember Noad Aten. However, I can remember a bunch of stories where kids were left without adult supervision to fend for themselves. Episode 5. You have a lot to learn about pirates. At this point in the series, we're in the second half of the show's first season, and things have been pretty wild. The kids have left their safe, sheltered, and secret planet. They've visited a pirate port on an asteroid. They've gone to a moon base to talk with an owl cat astronomer. And they've even visited a war-torn version of their own home planet. And they did all of this while being accompanied by a peg-legged pirate robot who has a space rat living inside of his skull, and an actual pirate who seems to get a new name every episode while traveling in an ancient spaceship that is being followed by a band of pretty pugnacious pirates. With all of that said, the shining example of a Nosnug in this episode is the Ark of the Covenant. Like, wait a minute. There's a chance that you might be thinking that I'm a little bit off here, and you might be saying to yourself, Ken, that was in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, you're right. And I'm pretty darn sure that we got to see that in this episode. I mean, Indiana Jones went on a quest to find it in the movies from the 1980s. We also saw it in season 1 of the Clone Wars, but I'm pretty sure that we saw something very similar to it in Renard's Booty Cave. Seeing that familiar gold chest got me thinking fondly of all the places where we saw it and all of the times that George Lucas partnered with his buddy Steven Spielberg to bring more magic to screens for all of us. We have them to thank for Indiana Jones movies, Jurassic Park movies. Heck, while we're at it, we might as well thank their friendship for the fact that George chose John Williams as the creator for most of the music for Star Wars. I mean, that's a treasure chest of a different sort that we'll talk about at some point. Episode 6, Zero Friends Again. In an episode that had connections to The Empire Strikes Back, Muppets Treasure Island, Brave, Indiana Jones, Mr. T, Hook, American Treasure, The Rise of Skywalker, The Grinch, Blackbeard, The Phantom Menace, Romancing the Stone, Goonies, Treasure Planet, Polar Express, and Home Alone, I'm choosing to highlight the trash grabs. Yeah, that's what I said. I'm going to talk about the trash grabs, and more specifically, their gigantic leader, Tetanus. The fantastic foursome of Wim, Fern, Neil, and KB broke off into new pairs. Neil chose to follow Fern up a seemingly impressive ladder, while KB, our augmented friend, chose to go with Wim, who had decided to follow a herd of trash crabs. After a very touching scene between KB and Wim, the two kids were led to Tetanus, the mother of all the trash crabs. And that giant trash crab was created by Phil Tippett and his team of stop-motion animators. Phil, who was inspired by the great Ray Harryhausen, has been involved with Star Wars since the beginning. We've seen his work in the hologram monsters on the Jar table, the Tauntauns, the Rancor, and the super creepy robot bug thing in the mines of Mandalore. He was also deeply involved in Starship Troopers, RoboCop, and Jurassic Park. And if you really want to step into his world of wild creations, you should watch the movie Mad God. In my mind, Tetanus is another example of a nostalgic nugget because it gets us thinking about all of the stop motion masterpieces that we've seen. I mean, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind and J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, models of R2-D2 were attached to those ships. And the same is true of Tetanus. In addition to using classic movie-making techniques of stop-motion models, the makers included bits of an astromech droid and a protocol droid like C-3PO. When Tetanus was threatening to eat two of our young characters. And the folks at Disney and Industrial Lights and Magic even released a short clip showing some of the behind-the-scenes wizardry of how they put Tetanus together. I mean, you can check it out. It's less than 10 minutes. It showcases some of the makers' amazing work and honors that Star Wars tradition of letting viewers see behind the curtain in order to educate them and inspire them to make things themselves. Episode 7. We're going to be in so much trouble. It's been said many times in many ways that Skeleton Crew is an homage to many movies that the makers were inspired by. And we can see many instances of this throughout the entire season. John Watts and Christopher Ford have mentioned the Goonies and E.T. quite often when they've talked about this show. And the nostalgic nugget that I'm going to feature here in this episode, the second to last episode, is the communication device that was built and displayed by KB's, Wim's, Fern's, and Neil's parents. Let's start off by talking about how it was made. I mean, just like in E.T., that titular alien, whose species coincidentally showed up in The Phantom Menace, put together all of these hodgepodges of pieces from a saw blade, a speak and spell toy, an umbrella, a fork, and a bunch of other random stuff to communicate with E.T.'s family across the cosmos. And even the deployment of that device brought up several nostalgic nuggets as well. I mean, the parents took turns passing it from one person to the other while running away from security droids, much like E.T. and his family running away from agents in the forest with that flashlight as they were chasing them. And their eyeball camera lenses that doubled as flashlights, and could be seen scanning through the forest as the foursome's family was trying to release this communication device up into the cosmos. In addition to passing the object from adult to adult to adult, each of them in cycle or in series was frozen by a familiar circular stun blast that was a lot like the one that stunned Carrie Fisher's character on the Tantive V4 in A New Hope back in 1977. Which brings us to the last episode of this season, Episode 8, The Real Good Guys. Speaking of the Tantive V4, also called among other things the Blockade Runner, it brings us to this season's finale. In this episode, the kids have been reunited with their parents on Aten, and the show used the final installments to wrap up much of what has taken place in the previous 7 episodes. Jod, a.k.a. Crimson Jack, a.k.a. Captain Silvo, a.k.a. Dash Zenton, I think it was, a.k.a. Professor Gorlax, Jodwick, Zank, and the Emissary. He convinced the security droids to let him into a vault and managed to disable this large electronic supervisor so that Gunther and Jod's other pirate friends could come into the planet and take all of the credits from the 1,139 underground vaults. The kids, with the help of their newly acquired skills and confidence, partnered with their parents to save Aten. Through an incredible series of events that included a speedy speeder bike chase, a tense standoff with Not a Jedi Jod, and KB taking to space in the Onyx Cinder with a beheaded then reheaded SM-33, Kim is contacted, and some of the New Republic forces are called. Aten's protective barrier was dropped, letting its inhabitants gaze upon the stars with their own eyes, and the New Republic swooped in ships to help take out the pirates. One of those ships, including B-Wings and X-Wings, happened to be this episode's biggest nos-nug, Corellian Corvette. I think the inclusion of this show, or the inclusion of this ship in this show, is a nifty nostalgic nugget for a ton of reasons. First of all, it helped bring an end to this show and this franchise the same way that the franchise started off back in 1977. I mean, just the sight of a ship like that helps think back of all of the makers who've been involved with Star Wars since George Lucas first sat down to write his ideas for The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of the Whills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. It calls back to the drawings of Colin Cantwell and Ralph McQuarrie's paintings and the kit bash models that were cobbled together by a ragtag group of hippies in a California warehouse. And speaking of those original makers, they originally brought the CR-90, aka the Corellian Corvette. They originally built it as Han's solo ship. And in the original script, it was intended to be a pirate ship. And its design had to be changed because it looked too much like a ship from another show that was coming out about that same time called Space 1999. So that one ship, that Corellian Corvette, launched many space pirate stories, including ones about Han Solo, Crimson Jack, Hondo Anaka, Enfys Nest, Crag and Gore, Gorian Shard, and now Jod Na Wood. And ending a show on Disney Plus with a ship that looks like one that started the franchise is like poetry. It rhymes. And so we've spent some time going through 8 nostalgic nuggets, one for every episode in season 1 of Skeleton Crew. And I hope that Skeleton Crew gets at least one more season. I think John Watts, Christopher Ford, and the many, many makers created something truly wonderful with this show. And I'd love to see the other NOS nugs that they could put on the screens for us to find and enjoy. So I'll tip my bucket to all of the makers, both behind the scenes and on the screens, because in my mind, Skeleton Crew is a wonderful addition to the Star Wars galaxy, and that I'll watch it again and again and again. But wait. There is one more nostalgic nugget that I want to mention, and it didn't even come from the actual show. As I mentioned before, this show's makers talked about how they were inspired by many things, including movies that came out in the 1980s. And the 1980s, those movies had their fair share of fun music. And the folks at Star Wars even used part of Peter Schilling's 1983 song, Major Tom, in a trailer for Skeleton Crew. And then they put together an entire music video for it. Included splashes of bright, colorful graphics, just like you'd see in the 1980s. And the song included lyrics that were translated into Huttese by Leland Shee and then sung by Matt Wood and David W. Collins. And so I'm going to let you hear at least a few, let you feast your ears on at least a few seconds of that masterpiece. And I'll make sure that I include links to the video and the lyrics in the show notes for all of you so you can read it and listen to it and watch it in its entirety. So thank you for taking the time to listen to or watch this episode of The Rambling Star Wars Fan. As I mentioned at the beginning, please take a moment or two to like and subscribe to the show. You can even rate or review us on wherever you watch the show or wherever you listen to it in your various podcatchers and so on. And as I said before, I'd really love it if you subscribe to the show so I can get to that magic number of 1,977 subscribers, followers, what have you. And I know it's been said many times and in many ways by many characters, the Force will be with you always.